All right, hello. This is take two for today's webcast. Yeah, apparently I was recording only my face for the last half hour, so totally useless. But let's get to it. I'm going to make sure, yes, that we are on the desktop as we get started. Okay, so the premise here is somebody in the group, in the community, wanted to know how to do a zooming in and zooming out panning effect, sort of like if you're working in After Effects, you have these cameras that you can zoom in and zoom out of. All right. But Flow works a little bit differently than After Effects. So I'll show you the premise of our idea. Oh, here is the animation that we created. I'm just going to create a new Flow file here, and we're going to open that up. We're going to make an empty timeline, and I'll show you the premise for why we need to do things a little bit differently in Flow. So when I zoom something, or when I scale something like this, it's going to create a track, an animatable track for the width and the height. Okay, if I undo that and I copy and paste and I do the same thing with a group, you might think that, okay, you're just scaling the group and all the stuff scales inside of it, but that's not exactly the case with Flow. And this has to do with one of the reasons why, because we're exporting to code, we're exporting to all these different places. What we do is we preserve all of the transforms that happen inside of that group. It actually gives you a much easier way of exporting cleanly, but also nice fine-grained control over your elements. What happens is that all of the elements inside the group scale along with the group. Okay, so when you're zooming into something, which is essentially a scaling operation, you're scaling this viewport kind of thing. You're actually scaling all the things that are inside of that group or that layer. So when you're thinking about an animation or something that you want to zoom in and zoom out of, it's really important to consider the beginning and end points of that animation, what they look like, and what parts of it you're not actually going to animate. So in this design here, this is a graphic that I downloaded from ui8.net, which is a really awesome resource. It has all kinds of layers. So we just go here, layers. Look at all these layers. Layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers. I'm in Illustrator at the moment. And so what we don't want to do with Flow is we don't want to animate all of the stuff. We don't want to have layers for all of the stuff that we're not animating. What we want to try and do is isolate the most important parts of our design. So let's pick a couple of layers. I'm going to export this guy right here and this one right here. So let's animate from this to that. Okay, and then let's export the selection as, nope, that's not what I want to do. I want to, I have it saved from before, so let's just do it one at a time. I'm going to make this selection. I'm going to right click and I'm going to export that selection as an asset. We're going to call that asset 7, and it's going to go onto the, actually, let's give it a name. Let's give it a name. Let's call it Bitcoin. We're going to export that. And in the settings, we want to make sure that our SVG settings are set to inline style. Save settings and export. Then we're going to take this. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to right click. We're going to export for selection. We're going to rename it to tower. And again, just to make sure, we're going to click on the settings. SVG says inline style. We're going to save those settings. We're going to export the asset. Now the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to go File, Export As. We're going to export a JPEG. We're going to use artboards. We're going to export artboard 1 because there's actually 2 artboards here. Okay, but we just want artboard 1, which is this. Let's go export as, I'm going to JPEG 1, and we go main image, JPEG. And we can do screen or high resolution. What we can do, say here, we want it actually to be a fairly high resolution so that, you know, if you're exporting to a movie, it's going to look nice and clean. I'm doing 300, but maybe 150 is going to work for you. It's just a matter of testing with your exports and the exports that come out of Flow. And you can always replace an image in Flow anyway. So let's just go with 300. And we're going to say, okay. It's going to export that artwork for us. So now instead of thousands of layers, we are actually going to have one image that we're going to work with in Flow. Okay, so this is the project that I had. I'm just going to press delete on that. I'm going to select and delete that timeline. See, I went over here, I selected the timeline, I hit delete, and we're just going to hit do it. And we're going to do it. And now we're going to create a timeline using our SVG. We're going to start, say, with the tower. And we're going to open that. And then what we can do is we can save file. What we can actually do is we can pop out of full screen mode. Let's rename this to bitcoin.svg and just drop that on there. And what we'll do with this one too is we'll just make sure that it's centered. I'm pressing Command and moving it around to snap it into place. That created an animation, so let's just delete the animation. And now we're going to turn on relative mode. I am just going to go back to Livestream Studio, make sure that I am on the desktop. I am. Doing better this time. Okay, and I'm going to go to this little, so we have these two layers, okay? Let's call this one, this is the tower. And the last thing we want to do is we want to bring in our image. So I can just press Command I for that one. And we're going to bring that in like that, open. And that's just going to put it right on top of the entire artboard right there. Okay, so we have our three assets. Okay, we have an animatable Bitcoin layer, an animatable tower layer, and we have our image layer. First, I will drag this image layer underneath the other two because we want it to be the one that's at the bottom. Oops, I put that into tower by accident. We want to just drag and make sure that little dot is outside of there. And then let's turn off the two layers, tower and Bitcoin. Now you can't see most of this image even if I zoom out. And that's because up here, the mask stage to artboard is on. And what that's doing is that's clipping all the contents to the artboard or to the scene. If I unclick that, then you can see everything that lies outside of the scene. Okay. So this image is really, really big, but when you click this button again, you're only going to see the stuff that's visible inside the scene. Easy. So let's say we want to animate from the Bitcoin app to the tower. All right, let's position our image so that it's right underneath the Bitcoin. Let's start with that. It means we're going to turn on that Bitcoin image right there. And oh, one thing I did forget is that the current artboard is clipping that. So the current artboard we started with, the tower, it imported to the same size as the tower, like that. But Bitcoin's a little bit wider. So let's just modify the artboard, or the scene right now, so that it allows us to see the entire Bitcoin app. What we're going to do is we're going to turn off adjust content on resize, because we're going to be resizing. We're going to drag this edge out, and then we're going to drag this edge out like that. So now we can see the entire Bitcoin app. and it allows us to also see the tower in its entirety. All right. Okay, so now we're going to position the image. Let's click this, turn the visibility of that on. We're going to select this image right here, and we're just going to move it fairly close and then press Command 1 to zoom in, and we are going to position that right underneath our Bitcoin. And if you toggle the Bitcoin on and off, you can't even see it change, okay? But it's there. So if I toggled this one on and off, I was actually just doing this. And that means if you can't see anything changing, that means it's perfect. Okay. So this is where we are at. The next thing that we want to do is we want to add an empty layer. We're going to insert a layer like this. So now what we have is we have our two shapes above a layer and our image. And we're going to drag the image over top of that layer to create a group. Let me say this is the main image group. And we're going to use the group to do the scaling effect. The first thing we'll do is we're going to go to the middle of our animation. We're going to turn off relative mode, and with the group selected and not the image itself, the group, okay, we're going to zoom out by scaling the size of the group down. Let's click like that. Okay, and now we've got this animation that goes like this. Do. So we have the zooming in and the zooming out animation. And what we actually want to see is we want that zooming in and zooming out animation to then pan between itself. It means it needs to be a little bit of a gap in time between the zoom in and the zoom out. So we're going to, as we mentioned before, we're creating animations for the image and for the group at the same time because we're preserving those animations. So what I'll do is I'll select all the zooming in and zooming out key values, and I'm pressing Option to duplicate them. And then I'm moving the two sides out here to 0.25 and here to 0.75, gives us a half a second in between. So this is the effect that we see. Okay. Zoom out, zoom in. Now, it's this time between here and here where we're supposed to do the panning. Okay, so I'm going to press. Here's a nifty trick. When you are selected into the timeline, you can press Option and left and right, and that's going to jump between key values on the timeline. So I'm jumping exactly to this moment in time. And here I am going to move over to the tower. I'm just moving. Okay, so that's going to create the X and Y animations for me. And it doesn't have to be perfect just yet. Okay, but it does do the zooming in and zooming out. And what we'll do is we're going to remove the X and Y from right here. That's not a good. What we'll do is we're going to move. This does the panning, sorry. This does the panning. And then we're going to go here, and we're going to actually just move this one back into position as well. We're going to go find that thing just like that. Okay. Now, so there we go. That's pretty close. And let's turn that tower icon on and just position our image so that it fits right onto that tower like that. Perfect. Okay, so now we have, if we turn off the tower, and let's slow that down just to have a look at it at half speed, and open that up nice and wide. hit play. We're zooming out, moving, and zooming in. Okay. Zooming out, moving, zooming in. Now it's time to add a little animation to the beginning and ends. Now I could end this tutorial right here saying we've done the zooming out and zooming in, but I wanted to also show you how the importing of the assets gives us the ability to go and animate parts of an image that would otherwise be unanimatable, right? So the thing that we're moving here is the main image, blue light, and we're zooming in and zooming out of the group, but then I wouldn't be able to select parts of that image and animate only those. So we're going to start with the Bitcoin. My lovely little laptop isn't liking all this broadcast and number crunching. It's sending things and doing stuff all at the same time. And with the Bitcoin, which is right there, let's pick the B. Let's just get in there. We're going to go in there. We're going to go into a view box. This is probably the path right here. And let's change this to 0.25. Let's change the fill color of this B to something nice and bright, like, oh yeah, like this little flow pink right here, like that. And we're going to zoom out a little bit, and we're going to find that path. Then we're going to bring this part back down to 0.5. So it's going to flicker on, then off. And then what we can do is we're going to take the last two, we're going to option drag them, just like copying a layer in any other design tool. We're going to position it like that. And so what it's going to do is it's going to do pink, blue, and then it's going to start its animation. Now, as soon as it starts the animation, we want that Bitcoin layer to disappear, which means that if we press Option and we click between the key values, we get to the last key value where that Bitcoin layer should be visible. We should now turn its opacity to 0. And since Flow preserves the ending of the animation like that, we're going to select the last key value and delete. And then we're going to change this to a step right, which means that that opacity animation that we had just created is now not going to change until the very last moment of that portion of our animation. Disappeared right there. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Flick, flick, flick. Out, zoom in. All right. Now the next part of this is just about the same technique, except instead of moving our animation to the left to create space, what we're going to do is we are going to click on the little clock icon. We're going to type 3, and we're going to expand our timeline by 1 second. And here, all right, here we will turn on the tower. All right. So at this moment in time at the end, that's where the tower exists. Okay. We want the tower to have started at 0 opacity. So I moved the playhead to 0, changed the opacity of the, oh, that was the Bitcoin layer I had selected. I did undo, select the tower, make the tower have 0 opacity. And it's going to animate to 1, which would be this key value over here. And again, the technique is at the moment in time where we want it to be visible, we want it to snap on. We don't want it to just fade in. So to align these two, okay, I can just select these two, do a little bit of an area selection, select 2 key values, and then I'm going to left align those key values. And again, I'm going to do a step right, which means that at this moment in time, the tower is not visible, and then it snaps on like that. And then we can do the same kind of animation as before. We'll select a layer inside of the tower. let's see. Let's hide that one. Double click, pick you, and let's say the fill color becomes green. And then we do the same trick as before. We take that fill color. Actually, this Y animation shouldn't have popped up. I must have just moved my mouse quickly. And bring this over here like that. Snap that into position or left align. And then set this one here to 0.25. Option duplicate. Option drag to duplicate. And drop it. So now we have a flashing green animation. And let's have a look at our entire animation. This is playing back at half speed. Oh, the Bitcoin layer was hidden. So let's just play it one more time. Flashing, zooming out, zooming in, flashing. Okay, let's play it at 1 speed. Great. And then we will export this as a movie. And let's just say, let's scale it to 2x, 60 frames, movie. Let's make it H.264. And then let's just do an MP4. And we export to the desktop just like that. Render some frames, and we're good to go. Okay, there we go. All right, so we hit play. There's our animation. Zooming in, zooming out, animating on both ends. Let's head back to you. Now you can see my lovely face again. One of my lights went out because it's a USB light, so it's a little bit darker now. And there you go. That is the technique that you can use if you want to do a zoom in and zoom out animation just like that. A little bit different technique if you're used to After Effects, but if you're not used to After Effects, then there you go. It's totally fine. So we looked at using layers. We looked at in Illustrator extracting only the layers that you want to animate, flattening everything else that you're not animating. This is such a useful technique because, again, what Flow does when you are animating or when you're importing a design from anywhere, it's trying to preserve every single layer. I mean, we can't guess which ones you want to animate, so we just bring in everything. It gives you the most flexibility possible. But there is certain times when you're just literally not animating things. So in a case where you do have an animation like this, or a design file like this one from Illustrator, where there's thousands and thousands of lines, you don't want to bring all of those lines into Flow. You just don't. It's not useful. It's not conducive to working quickly. It will slow down. It'll slow down everything, because Flow is then going to try and crunch numbers and create key values for thousands and thousands of layers. And that's not what you want. And also the effect that you want doesn't even necessitate that kind of animation or that kind of layering, that kind of dealing with SVG files or paths or anything like that. And even if you weren't, I mean, we exported this animation out as a movie, but even if you weren't exporting as a movie, okay, even if you were exporting to code, importing all of those layers as paths and then exporting that would be insane. It would be thousands and thousands of lines of code to get that all rendering properly. And you don't want that either. Okay, so there are ways to animate your designs, and this was sort of a combination of showing you how to optimize exporting for animation and a technique on zooming in, zooming out, and panning at the same time. Okay, so there's some really cool things coming up next week. A couple of people had some really awesome announcements from the community. Andy Dent and Catherine Yu, I believe, with these awesome projects. Let's have a look. Inspirations. Yeah, Catherine Liu. And I'm going to introduce those on Monday. And we'll start again with some simple concepts on Monday as well. But until then, have a great weekend. I hope you recover if you're not feeling so good, because I'm not feeling good and I'm going to be recovering this weekend. Otherwise, I'll see you next week and we'll continue. Okay, talk to you soon.